The Mamiya C220. And in this edition of Jules Voto's Photo Focus, I'm going to explain all its features, controls, and how everything works. Now, I just picked this camera up for a very good price, and normally I go through the history of a camera, but I'm not going to do that in this case. We're going to get just right to how it works, and I'll explain everything to you. Okay, so it's a twin lens reflex, and what that means is that it has two lenses. A viewing lens up here, and the taking lens down here. And there is a mirror behind the viewing lens, and comes standard with a waist level finder. And one of the advantages of that, the fact that you're viewing through this upper lens here, is that when you press the shutter release, there's no blackout. Okay, there's a fixed mirror for the viewing lens, and unlike a single lens reflex camera where you are viewing through the taking lens, and then when you press the shutter release, the mirror flips up and there's blackout. Well, you don't have that. You have a constant view of your subject with a twin lens reflex. So you could observe the subject, for example, a portrait subject at the moment of exposure to see if their eyes are closed. Also, if you have a strong filter on the taking lens, your view doesn't darken. Whereas with an SLR, let's say you're shooting black and white and you put on a red filter in order to bring out the clouds in a landscape, well, you don't have to worry about that. Now, with a polarizer, of course, you have the disadvantage of, normally on an SLR, you would put a polarizer on and rotate it to see what it does. Well, you don't have that ability with the TLR. So you're viewing through the viewing lens. And the issue with twin lens reflex cameras is that the viewing lens is above the taking lens, so you have a parallax issue. This is seeing a little bit different view than the taking lens. And I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go along. So this camera, like I said, comes with standard waist level viewfinder, has a pop-up magnifier, and also a frame of sports finder, as they call it. So once the magnifier is up, you press down on the front here. Okay, and now you view through here, and it gives you an approximation of the view of the 80mm lens. There are also masks that fit here. You see these two little pins here that will show you the approximate field of view of various other lenses. Okay, what we have here is the view through the waist level viewfinder. And as you could see, it's reversed. But before I get further into that, I just want to mention something about the sport finder. The sport finder is, there's no optics, okay? You're just looking through a frame finder. You cannot focus. What you need to do is focus before you look through that frame finder, either by setting the distance, approximating the distance, or focusing on the ground glass screen. So with the waist level finder, as you could see, with this box of 8 o'clock coffee, everything is reversed. So it takes a little getting used to. If you had a waist level finder for a 35mm camera, cameras with interchangeable finders, it's the same type of view. It's reversed. The prism finder or the poro finder for the Mamiya will correct that. Now, of course, the image on the film is okay. So it gets a little getting used to, but what's nice with the medium format camera is you have that large screen to compose on. This is one of the few twin lens reflex cameras that takes interchangeable lenses. There are 4 interchangeable lenses for the C220. The standard 80mm 2.8 that you see here. There is also a 55mm 4.5 wide angle, a 65mm 3.5 wide angle. a 105 3.5, a 135 4.5, a 180 4.5, and a 250 millimeter 6.3. You will notice two focusing knobs, one on the right, one on the left, and this camera has a bellows. Okay, and you could focus very close with the standard 80 millimeter lens. You could get to within 14 inches of the film plane. Okay, one of the nice advantages of a TLR is it's very quiet. There's no moving mirror. So I just want to set this so I can fire the shutter. Normally, the shutter will not fire unless there's film in it, unless it's wound, but I'm just going to set this to multi. You can do multiple exposures with this camera. And let's cock the shutter. And you can see how quiet that is. Let's do that again. I'm going to hold it up near my microphone. So it's much quieter than an SLR, and there's no vibration when you release the shutter. Okay, this camera takes 120 or 220 film. However, 220 film is no longer being made. With 120 film, you get 12 2¼ square images. With 220, you would have gotten 24 images. Okay, so let's go over some more of the controls. So after you focus, and you can view through the waist level finder, use this pop-up magnifier to fine focus. Okay, we're just going to close this up. I think it'll make it a little easier to see everything. All right, we have, like I explained earlier, our focus knobs. That's how you focus. On the right side here, we have our wind knob. It's also a fold-out crank. Okay, we have our switch for multiple exposures, single or multi. Now you could take multiple exposures with this camera, double exposures, and all you need to do is take your first exposure, turn this to multi, cock the shutter, take the second picture. Okay, and make sure you put it back to single. Okay, here's a setting here. I have it set to 120. If we were using 220, you would push it over there. Again, no more 220, so we don't have to worry about that. Here's your shutter release right here. It also takes a cable release, standard cable release, right on the top here. Okay, you can see where that goes in. Pretty simple camera, actually. There's no built-in meter. You need a separate handheld meter. You have several finders, Puro finders, some with a built-in meter. Puro finders use a mirror. There's also a prism finder, which gives you a brighter view. Prism finder is heavier, and there's no prism finder with a meter. There's also a high magnification finder, which is settable from 3.5 times to 6 times, so for really fine focusing. So to remove the viewfinder, it's very simple. This works exactly the same as on the C330. You just loosen this, a little bit more, and lift it off. Screens are not interchangeable. They are on the C330. All right, you just put it back. Let's come over to this side of the camera. And as I said, it takes interchangeable lenses. And when you're going to interchange a lens, you must turn, right now it says lock, okay? We just turn this little dial. And what that does, it brings down a cover so that when you take the lens off, the film doesn't get exposed. So once you do that, let's just turn this around this way. We just press down right here, and we can remove the lens. Pretty simple. When that cover is down, okay, so you don't accidentally try to take pictures. There, and again, you probably won't be able to see this. There's a red bar on the screen that indicates that, turn this to lock. Now you also have a distance scale here as you focus the lens. It's a little confusing because it has markings for all 7 of the lenses. But here we see it states here 80 millimeters, okay? And we have this black curved line. This is for the 65. This red line, this is for the 55. But let's just concern ourselves right now with the 80. So I'm just going to turn the focus ring. Okay, I'm just going to stop it right there. Okay, if you look right here, this is feet, this is meters. That's 4 feet. And where the curved black line intersects with the number, that's your focus distance. Now also, because this has a bellows, as you focus closer, you're going to need to increase exposure. And you could also read that right here. Okay, now if you look a little further down, here's the 80 millimeter marking, okay? And you will look right here, when I am focused at 4 feet, you see this 1.5. Here you have 1 time, you don't need to increase exposure. But once you get to 4 feet, you need to increase your exposure. And it says 1.5 times. So you multiply your exposure time by 1.5. Simple way to figure that, if you're at, let's say you're shooting with a 1 second exposure and focus to 4 feet, well, you need to increase that exposure to 1.5 seconds. Okay? You can't set the shutter speed between settings, so you would just use the aperture. For example, if you were at 4 feet, you were shooting at f8, you just want to open it up a half a stop. If you were focused closer, okay, so let's go in closer. All right, now we see 2. Multiply your exposure 2 times. So here you have the choice. Let's say your exposure was 1/125th of a second at f8. You would increase your exposure 1 stop, either to a 60th at f8 or to 5.6 at the same shutter speed. Okay, and there's no click stops on this aperture. Okay, so you could set it anywhere in between. The shutter must be set to the marked spot. You can't set it in between. And it clicks into place. So you have shutter speeds from B, bulb, all the way up to a 500th of a second. You notice this is for your flash. If you're using electronic flash, it must be set to X. And here is the PC outlet where you plug your flash into. Now with electronic flash, as I said, you plug it in here, make sure this is on X. But another big advantage of a camera with a leaf shutter, and the twin lens reflex camera has a leaf shutter, is it will sync with flash at every speed, all the way up to a 500th of a second. So that's a big advantage if you do outdoor fill flash photography. That's why these cameras, as well as single lens reflex medium format cameras with leaf shutters, were popular with wedding photographers. Okay, so the apertures range from 2.8 with this particular lens up to f32. Now, you cannot observe depth of field because you're viewing through the viewing lens, and it's a fixed aperture of 2.8. However, you do see the depth of field at 2.8. So if you really want to determine depth of field, it's best to use a depth of field chart in the manual that comes with the camera, and you could download these online. It does have depth of field charts for each lens. So here is your control for your aperture. Okay, you just turn this and it's viewable on the left side of the lens, and your shutter speeds are right here. Now with this camera, this is your film advance. Okay, right here, either the crank or the knob. When film is loaded, after you take a picture, after you take the first picture, you just turn this until it stops. It advances the film to the next frame. However, you must manually cock the shutter. And you do that with this lever here. You just press this down after you advance the film. And let me set this back to multi so it will allow me to release the shutter. Okay, advance to the next one. Cock the shutter. So that's a little bit slower than this camera's brother, the Mamiya C220. That has just a crank that advances a film and cocks the shutter. Now, I mentioned parallax, that this lens sees something different than this lens. When you were focused at the point where you need to use a half a stop exposure compensation, when you see 1.5, there is a bar in the viewfinder. You must keep your subject below that bar.
Okay, now let's look at the view through the waist level finder like we saw before. And you could see towards the top there, there's that bar, or etched line, I guess is a better way to call it. So when you are focused at a distance that requires an exposure increase of 1.5 times, you must keep the subject below that upper etched line, or else the top of the image will be cut off.
When you were focused, extend it even more here till we get to an exposure of 1 stop to the 2 here, then you must keep your subject below the second bar.
Okay, now back to that view of the finder, and you could see that second etch line, the one that's lower, the one that's right near the top of the 8 o'clock coffee. So when you were focused at a distance that requires an exposure compensation of 2 times, then you must keep the subject below that lower etched line. Okay, and anything above that will be cut off. So it's a bit of a pain. You have to look at the side of the camera. You have to look at the distance scale to the exposure compensation, see what that is. And then remember, when you look through the viewfinder, whether it be the waist level finder or the prism or poro finder or the high magnification finder, that you keep your subject below the appropriate etched line. And remember, when you're shooting at greater distances, this parallax issue really only comes into play at closer distances. It's not much of a problem when you get to greater distances. I think just keep in mind, I'll always allow a little bit of extra room at the top of the view in whatever finder you're using.
Okay? So if not, you're going to cut the head off of a portrait subject. So that's a disadvantage of the TLR. And in this one in particular, some others have automatic parallax compensation, where the bar in the viewfinder will move as you focus closer. Now, that makes this not the greatest camera for close-up photography, although you have that capability, right? Because of the bellows. You could focus, as I said before, to 14 inches with the 80mm lens. So they have an accessory known as a Paramender. And this is the Paramender. This end you attach to the camera. So this screws into the tripod socket, this little pin here, into one of these holes. So it's very secure. So now let's say you're doing some close-ups, right? This end is mounted to a tripod. So you focus, obviously, with the viewing lens. Once you have focused and framed your shot, you just turn this lever. Okay, let me show you again. You just turn this knob, and it raises, and then you tighten it here. It raises the taking lens to where the viewing lens was. And don't have to worry about parallax. Okay, here we have the camera mounted on the Paramender. I wanted to give you a different view in actual use on the tripod. Okay, so now the Paramender is at the normal position and taking this picture of the 8 o'clock coffee. Okay, I'm going to loosen this little knob on the front. I'm sorry if you can't see that. I know you can't see that. And then we're going to turn this, and it's going to raise the camera up 1.5 inches. Okay, I'm going to lock it in place. And now the taking lens is in the same position as the viewing lens was, and we don't have to worry about parallax. So this is a nice little accessory if you're going to do close-up photography with a twin lens reflex camera, with the Mamiya twin lens reflex cameras, because it raises that taking lens into the same position that the viewing lens was. Now if you're going to do another shot, you just loosen this, turn this, camera drops down, frame it up, focus, and then you bring it back up. Okay, now let's look at loading film. To open the back on the Mamiya C220, just like the C330, you press down here, you turn this with your thumb to the right, and you push it over, and the back snaps open. Now, if we had just finished the roll, the exposed roll would be up here, and we would be left with an empty spool at the bottom. So I have this set up right now the way it would look if you had just taken a roll out, an exposed roll out. Okay, so we're going to load a roll of HP5. I don't know, I have no fingernails. I used to be able to just rip these open, so I'm just going to cut the end of the foil off. Having trouble here, huh? I don't want to damage the film. All right, here we go. I don't know, I need to grow some fingernails, I guess, to open these 120. I haven't owned, well, I own a Yashica, but I only shot a couple of rolls of film with it. So I used to shoot medium format all the time. Okay, so what we need to do first, we just pull out here, okay, and turn it a little bit so it stays open. We're going to open this. These hold the film spools into the camera. And now we're going to remove this empty one. You just press into it, open it, and you're going to put this one in, and then close this. Okay. Let's just turn it so we have a slot visible. Okay, this one is open. We're going to now open our roll of film. Actually, we could just remove this tab here. Okay, and there's a paper backing, so we then drop it in to the right first, drop it down. All right, make sure that clicks in place. There we go, it's got to be all the way in, and now we pull some of the film out. We drop it in right here. Okay, it's that little leader, goes right in here. There's a paper backing the length of 120 film. Now we're just going to advance this, okay? Now, you will see a red dot here and a red dot here. We're going to be, I'm turning this slow, what you will see is an arrow. Okay, here comes the arrow. You line that arrow up with the red dot. Now also, one other thing I should have mentioned, this camera, as I said, can take either 120 or 220. There's no more 220, so we don't have to worry about it, but you make sure this red dot is opposite 120. If you were going to use 220, you would just turn the pressure plate. Another thing, I just replaced the seals on this camera. I got this camera for a very good price. The only bad thing about it, well, the only thing wrong with it, I should say, was that the seals were bad. Easy to replace. US Camera has uscamera.com. Go there, and they have seals for just about every camera. They come pre-cut, and I'll tell you, it was kind of easy on this camera. I've done it on a f2, not as easy. Okay, so now we close it back. Now you will notice I press down on both sides. You then take this and turn it counterclockwise until it stops. Now you can't open the back, right? You could have left it up there, but then if you had moved this over, the back would have opened. All right, so now we're going to unfold the crank. You could use a knob. All right, and we just turn this. You will notice the frame counter there. All right, it stops. And I hope you can see this. I know it's kind of small, but we're on frame 1. Now it's ready to take pictures. So if we were going to take a picture right now, I'm not going to. We would cock the shutter, set our exposure, cock the shutter, press the shutter release. We would then wind this to the next frame, cock the shutter, take another picture. So it's a little slow because of that, but once you get used to it, you just advance the film, cock the shutter with your thumb. It's very easy. It's nice that we have focusing knobs on both sides. The one thing I'm not really that crazy about is the focus scale here. You know, you have to make sure you're looking at the proper lens that you have mounted, and you have to worry about how much extension you have to compensate the exposure. But once you get used to it, it's not that bad. And this camera does not take interchangeable screens. However, as I said, it does take interchangeable finders and those 7 lenses, which are all pretty good. They're not very fast. The fastest lens is the normal, which is 2.8, and your 65 and your 105 are 3.5 maximum aperture. Focusing is pretty easy with this camera. I think I'm going to try to pick up the high magnification finder. Primary thing I'm going to do with this camera is shoot black and white, probably on a tripod for the most part. Landscape type stuff. I may do some close-up type stuff. That's why I bought the Paramender. But I just love 2 1/4 square negatives. I love square prints. And I am also setting up a darkroom again for the first time in over 20 years. And I will be making square prints on fiber-based paper with a Omega B22 enlarger, which just arrived. I will be doing a video on that. And if you have any questions or comments on this camera, the Mamiya C220, please leave them in the comments below. Another thing I should add, the C330, which basically has 3 main differences from this camera. One is the crank also cocks the shutter. It takes interchangeable screens, and it does have a moving bar below the focusing screen that will show you how much exposure compensation you must add for the bellows, and also that you keep the subject below that bar so you don't cut part of the image off. So it makes it a little quicker to operate and a little easier, but this camera is 11 ounces lighter. So if you're carrying it, I think you would prefer this one. Okay, so like I said, any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below. I always try to respond to all questions and comments, and I normally publish a new video every Monday morning and Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon.